Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Last Week This Morning, where Mark and I recap the top stories from Energy Media last week. And we are going to jump right into things with inside Danielle Smith's baffling oil agenda. This was a big story over the weekend, Mark, and I think it's a great place to start.
Not that long ago, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith sent a mandate letter to her energy minister, Brian Jean. And a mandate letter is basically, usually comes out after they win an election.
Yep.
But we're midway through since the last election, midway through the government. And so she sent him a mandate letter very clearly setting out what she wants him to achieve. And I took a look at this letter because Danielle Smith has a habit of speaking extemporaneously, off the cuff, right? She'll
Yeah.
go to a press conference or a panel or whatever, and when she's speaking in public, and she'll drop these little, oh, we want to double oil production, and it doesn't really resonate. The my media colleagues don't pick it up, and because they're not all linked together it's not as easy to describe her vision of the future.
Right.
Well, well, in the mandate letter, it's very easy to tell because it's all laid out in her instructions to Jean to take steps to implement that vision. So that's what the video was about.
Yeah. And so it's five pipelines that she wants to build. Is that right?
Okay, there's three parts to
I'm
it
losing
that
track here.
yeah, there's three parts to the mandate letter, and I'll quickly go through them. So the first is to double Alberta oil production from 4 million barrels a day to 8 million barrels a day.
Right. By
This
2035.
by 2035, in 10 years.
Yeah.
This is nuts.
Huge.
It's nuts. I don't even think that if the industry was on board and they had the pipelines to ship it to markets, that they could do it. I mean, remember, Alberta right now is 3.5 million barrels a day of oil sands, bitumen, and 500,000 barrels a day of conventional light sweet crude.
Right.
And and it took from roughly 2000 to 2025 to get up to those 3.5 million barrels a day. So to double that, and actually it wouldn't be another three, it would have to be 4.5 million barrels a day.
Yeah. More than double.
Yeah. So how that can't happen. It's not going to happen. It's too large.
Yes.
It requires too much capital. It's beyond the capacity of the companies to do. But why she wants to do it, and this is my pet theory, is right now the US is the top oil producer in the world at about 11.2 million barrels a day. Then Russia and Saudi Arabia kind of jockey for two and three at about 9.2, 9.3 million barrels a day. And Russia's going down and Saudi Arabia is going up. And Canada is number four in the world. Like when we talk about being an energy superpower in conventional energy, we already are an energy superpower from the perspective of volume. So we're the
Right.
fifth largest oil producer in the world. But if Smith has her way, that would launch Canada we would have 9 million barrels a day across the country, and we would be playing in the same league as Saudi Arabia and Russia. So,
Wow.
and the industry doesn't explicitly endorse doubling, but it does say they've sent, the industry sent letters was signed by CEOs, open letters to the prime minister saying, we want to achieve the potential of this generational opportunity to the maximum. They basically want to clear the decks. They want to get rid of regulations and emissions concerns, and they don't care. All they want is they see this massive opportunity from their point of
Yeah.
view, and they want the government to get out of the way, and they want BC to get out of the way. They want everyone to just get out of the way and let them do business. And so that's number one. Number two is the pipelines to get that expanded oil supply out to
Right.
market, right? So a
Right.
million barrel a day to the West Coast, and then one to the Arctic, and one to Churchill, Manitoba, and one to Southern Ontario, and another one down into the US, or maybe multiple ones, into the US market.
Right.
There is going to be a massive fight between BC and Alberta over, uh, because one of the stories we're going to talk about is Alberta announced that it will be the proponent. The government will be the proponent for a pipeline to the West Coast, and it'll have
Right.
technical advisors, and we'll get into that in a minute. There's going to be a massive fight over that. That's one pipeline.
Yeah.
Imagine how big the fight will be if we're trying to build five pipelines
Yeah.
and maybe at the same time. Okay, so that's number two. And the number three is all the regulation. Like imagine if you doubled the size of your oil industry, or maybe even more, how much you have to have. The regulator has to be bigger. And the
Yeah.
regulator, the Alberta Energy Regulator, is a mess. It is an absolute mess. Canada does not understand the size of the environmental liability crisis facing
Yeah.
Alberta right now. An AER estimate from 2018 pegs it for both conventional and oil sands at $260 billion of unfunded liabilities. 80,
Astronomical.
80,000 wells are sitting inactive in a list just sitting out there, idle and that need to be reclaimed. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
massive problem. So if you double the size of the industry, then you have to somehow, or you should be grappling with that particular issue.
Yeah.
And so there would have to be regulatory reform. There would have to be liability management framework reform. I mean, the size of what she is asking for is beyond, it's hard to wrap your head around it, to be honest. But this is her agenda. And this is what drives her. I mean, a lot of, and she's speaking behind her as an industry that doesn't really know what to do with Danielle Smith in a way. Because on the one
Right.
hand, she's their champion, and on the other hand, she's batshit crazy. And she says all kinds of things, and she picks
Yeah.
fights with the federal government all the time. And they're kind of going, oh, they kind of, oh, but we like that. Oh, I don't, it's kind of a love-hate relationship, I think, between
Right.
the big companies and Danielle Smith. But this is driving a lot of the politics in Canada. Tim
Yeah.
Hodgson, the federal energy minister, Mark Carney, the prime minister, have all made, for months, have been making encouraging noises about expanding the oil industry and building pipelines. And the industry is now very hopeful that a lot of their longstanding issues like regulatory reform will now get resolved. So
Yeah. Well,
this is,
this is a
yeah,
perfect time to pivot. I want to talk about this announcement that Danielle Smith made also last week about the application to the federal projects office. She launched out there with, she has these partners, Enbridge, South Bow, and the federally owned Trans Mountain
yeah,
Corporation. So we've got those, I say federally owned, I mean, that's a big part that was kind of missed out of that initial announcement that came out. And so she's made this big announcement. They have partners apparently at the table. They've tried to include Indigenous partners. That was one thing that was really
right.
championed by her from the outset. They are going to partner with those First Nations and Indigenous folks. Now, there is that big opposition, like you mentioned, coming from the BC side. So where are we at with this? What
Okay,
what should
the
we be
first
talking
thing,
about?
the thing we're not talking about and that we've focused on here is what is a federal crown corporation, the Trans Mountain Expansion,
Yes,
the company that owns Trans Mountain Pipeline, doing on Alberta's technical advisory group. Now, she says, "Oh, we're going to lean on Trans Mountain for technical expertise." They don't need Trans Mountain's technical expertise. Enbridge was the proponent for it was canceled in 2016, but the Northern Gateway project I mean, they were thoroughly reviewed and approved at one point by the Stephen Harper government. And so
right.
they have examined all of the routes. And there are only two routes. Like there's Kitimat, uh, which is
And
south,
Prince Rupert.
and Prince Rupert.
Yeah,
And they said Prince Rupert is not viable. It's too technically challenging going through the mountains, and Kitimat is the only viable option. Uh,
right.
so all that work has been done. It doesn't need Trans Mountain. Trans Mountain, in my opinion, is there because it's a signal that the federal government wants this to happen.
They want to fund it.
Well, you know, there are different ways. The federal government has pots of money that
Yeah.
it could lend, including support for Aboriginal investment, and
Okay.
Trans Mountain could invest in it. Trans Mountain has
Right.
commercial facilities that would be backed up by the credit of the government of Canada. So
Right.
there are ways for Trans Mountain to be the vehicle for the federal government's participation in a pipeline. And
Right.
I think that's why Trans Mountain is at the table. So that's one issue. I think that's a big signal that the feds like a pipeline project, want to see it happen if it can be made to happen.
Right.
The other thing is BC Premier David Eby kind of dismissed it. He said, "Well,
Yeah.
there's no real proponent. There's no project here. They're just striking a group to look at it." Big mistake. Big mistake. You're underestimating the intention, the determination of Danielle Smith to get
Right.
this done. And I think she's demonstrated in other files in Alberta, like education and healthcare, that and also in oil and gas with some of the projects that she's brought forward that were unpopular. So she rebranded them and brought them back in through the back door.
Yep.
She doesn't quit.
Yep.
And downplaying the significance of this proposal where Alberta government steps forward as the proponent to advance this a pipeline project is just a huge mistake. The point here is that Danielle Smith, this is a real project, and EB is doing now. EB might know this and probably does know this. He's a smart dude, and maybe he's just downplaying it, for his domestic audience. But our audience is mostly opposed to the pipeline. And
Yep.
we see, said this before, our audience thinks that, Carney is playing 4D chess with Smith and she's playing checkers. No, oh no. Smith is up to the task. She is also playing 4D chess, maybe 5D chess.
Well, we have to look at the history here. We know that even if BC does oppose the pipeline, if it goes through the courts, I mean, the federal government will push it through.
Oh, yes. This is another point. I see people on
Yeah.
social media saying all the time, "Oh no, BC is against it. Oh no,
Yeah.
BC First Nations are against it." The
Yeah.
Trans Mountain Expansion pipeline, uh, that this came up because there were constitutional issues, and the
Right.
National Energy Board, which is the regulator, what's what it was called at that time, and this is not well understood, is under federal legislation functions as a superior court. So that means that it can, just like a court, it can rule on constitutional issues. And twice it ruled that the federal government has exclusive jurisdiction over pipelines that cross provincial borders. That
Right.
those decisions were then upheld by the Federal Court of Appeal, and it is now established precedents. Those decisions function as precedents.
Right.
So if basically, and it was also discussed at the time for Trans Mountain whether or not First Nations had a veto. Like if they said no, was it a no?
Yeah.
And and so the answer was no, they don't have a veto.
Right.
So the BC government can't stop it. First Nations can't stop it. And the only issue here is whether Carney has the kind of political backbone that Justin Trudeau had, and he'll push it through regardless of opposition from British Columbia. That's the big question at this point.
So what is the major projects office going to do? Basically, we have to wait. We've got a 6 month timeline on this. Hope it's going to be submitted in 6 months. Sorry.
Right.
So that it's happening pretty fast. It's faster than you think.
Well, that's right. I mean, that's what Smith said during her announcement is that
Yeah.
this technical advisory group would come forward with an application. The Alberta government would be the proponent, and so it would be submitted, presumably to the major projects office, which would then evaluate the project and decide whether it should be designated as a project of national interest, a pony, for
Yep.
the federal government to then put it into that process, which compresses the review into 2 years. Environmental
Right.
review, Aboriginal consultation, all that stuff would take place in 2 years. So we'll know more in 6 months, how successful they are.
So I want to talk, where was the opposition? Where is Nenshi on this issue? I mean, she made this big announcement and what did he come back with?
Okay, so for those who aren't aware, Naheed Nenshi is former Calgary mayor and was quite successful. I
Correct.
think in 2014 he was chosen as the world's best mayor. I mean, that's
Oh,
no small
wow.
achievement, right?
Yeah.
The guy's really smart. He's got an MA, was a professor of business at the Mount Royal University. He was a McKinsey consultant for a long time. Likes to think of himself as the smartest guy in the room. Uh, Became the leader of the Alberta NDP when Rachel Notley stepped down last year, and there were
Right.
high hopes for him. And I think now there's a lot of disappointment, but particularly on the energy file, because on oil and gas and pipelines, he essentially, his line is, we need all of that. We agree with the UCP on what needs to happen. We just think the UCP is not very good at implementing it. And so we call it UCP light, is essentially what his position is. And my argument is, look, they're the opposition, the loyal, His Majesty's loyal opposition, and
Correct.
they really have two jobs. One is to criticize, which he does, not very well, but he does criticize energy and policies, and the other is to present something different, is to say, well, okay, we don't like what Danielle Smith is proposing. Here's our proposal. If we were government, this is how we would handle it. And then the idea is that you have a public debate over the differing approaches, and that influences how the government goes forward. And that's the way it used to work back in the good old days. And that's the way it's designed to work. That's not how
Yeah.
it works today. And Nenshi, in my opinion, I called him out on this, and I've been waiting. I mean, we don't talk about Nenshi very often. I get his media announcements all the time, because he doesn't comment very often on energy like oil and gas.
Right.
And what he does say is just not relevant. I mean, it's just not interesting. There's nothing. He doesn't add anything to the conversation about that particular issue. But this one is so big that I couldn't let it go. It was time. It's time to call out the Alberta NDP the party's inability to create coherent energy strategies and policies and present them to the Alberta. They didn't. They did it under Notley only because they had access to experts. You know, Professor Andrew Leach, economist at the University of Alberta,
Right.
led their climate consultations before the climate leadership plan was announced in late 2015. They had all kinds, they brought in experts into the Department of Energy. They consulted on experts, and they came up with generally good policy. Then they lost the 2019 election, and all of their and they just became allergic to energy again. That Rachel Notley didn't want to talk about it. They didn't bring forward any really innovative, strong proposals. And it's time to call them out. It's time that the party has to get its poop in a group, and it has to have a coherent approach to the future of energy in Alberta and Canada. Otherwise, it's irrelevant.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, the lack of concrete alternatives, even as a narrative or as a discussion or as a possibility, it is disappointing. I mean, I guess what he's hoping is that we'll just trust that he can do better at this point.
Yes. And the thing is, I gave in the video, I laid
Yeah.
out a strategy based on four things.
Yes.
One of them is starting to pivot towards advanced materials manufacturing using bitumen as a feedstock. One of them
Hmm.
is optimizing the Trans Mountain expansion much more than they're planning to do in order to serve Asian markets. A third
Right.
one is to take more market share in the United States, where Alberta ultra heavy sour crude is the competitive barrel against all other competitors. So it's very
Yeah.
competitive. Why not take more than the 65% the province already has? And And so there's and then crude to chemical petrochemical production, which is the Chinese and the Saudi Arabia are pioneering this. And
Right.
Alberta already has the second largest petrochemical complex in North America.
Yeah.
So there are four things that could act as the backbone of an Alberta NDP strategy, and then they could add renewables and electrotech and all sorts of other things to that, and maybe hydrogen, and you could make a very coherent strategy and policy and set of policies that would point Alberta in a different direction than the Smith government is dragging it. Instead, Nenshi is just UCP light. And I think that's a disservice to the Alberta voters.
Yeah, we really got to play to our strengths that we already have in Alberta. And like you're highlighting, there are many. One thing I want to talk a little bit more about is you also did a video this week where we talked about orphan wells and this looming crisis, liability for taxpayers. Uh, Tell me more about that. Does Nenshi or Danielle Smith have a position about this? Is this something that's going to be addressed?
Nenshi doesn't, Smith does. So from 2019 to 2022, while she was still a talk show radio host, she was also a
Right.
registered lobbyist for the oil and gas industry.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that she promoted was called R-Star. So it was a credit program that was billed as $20 billion, but really, according to Professor Leach, the real cost to taxpayers would be about $6 billion, and the idea was to clean up old wells. Like these are
Right.
wells that, are never going to be brought back into production. They really don't have owners. There's nobody to reclaim them. So, the taxpayer is going to pay to reclaim them. And that absolutely flies in the face of the polluter pays principle. And the
Correct.
government, past governments have committed themselves to polluter pays. And the Smith government kind of, pays lip service to it. But they
Mhm.
brought in, so R Star was floated, hugely unpopular. So it was withdrawn. Then they said, well, we'll do a little pilot project, just to test it out. And now
Yeah.
they've brought it back in the mature asset strategy, which is still kind of under discussion, and there's still public meetings about it. But as Mark Dorn pointed out in an interview, who's an oil and gas administrative law expert,
Right.
uh, uh, Smith's mandate letter to Brian Jean says that he should implement that strategy. So how do you can't get around the perception that the public consultations are just window dressing. There's no real public input. They've already got it decided. It's in a desk, so, the minister's desk, ready to go when the time comes. And now he's been given the direction from the premier to go implement it. And it will result in taxpayer money being used to reclaim old oil and gas assets.
Yeah, well, folks, you have to watch this interview with Mark Dorman because that really looks at how the government is not holding the companies up. They're offloading all of those liabilities and kind of letting the companies off scot-free. I mean, I maybe not completely, but I think it's really looking bad for taxpayers. Could be decades and decades of costs.
This is a crisis, and the government and the industry keep saying, "Oh no, we're the greenest oil and gas industry in the world. We lead the world in environmental responsibility." No, that isn't the
It's
truth. They're not
not
even
true.
close. It's a fig leaf to reassure Albertans and Canadians that everything's under control. Don't worry about it. We've got it. They don't have it. This is a crisis that we can it's the oil tanker out of control, going to crash on the coast, can't turn, and the only question is when is it going to hit the coast and break up into pieces. That's how bad this is.
Okay, I want to shift gears. I want to zoom out at the global level and talk about what OPEC is doing and if that's creating some market volatility.
Yeah, I interviewed Ed Hurst, who's the energy economist at the University of Houston. And there's a lot of debate about this because, on the one hand, OPEC has been unwinding oil production cuts now for better part of a year, maybe a little bit more. And I think they brought back on 2.5 million barrels a day, and they have more production that they had cut. So they have more production
Right.
capacity that they can bring back. I think just on the weekend, they're going to bring back another 137,000 barrels a day. But prices have dropped. They're down around, I think Brent is down around $65 a barrel. Uh,
Yeah.
but but a lot of that is the fact that China, the government, is replenishing its reserves, and there's been some of that in the U.S. as well. And as Ed pointed out, there's a tremendous amount of seaborne oil that isn't finding buyers. So it's almost like those ships are also functioning as storage. So
Yeah.
when you take into all of that, so the question is, will OPEC's unwinding of its production cuts, when will prices fall? Or will they fall? And the bulls say, no, 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 we're good. And the bears are heading for the exits, and they can see another glut. The IEA is predicting a glut starting next year, and
Yeah.
and has in the past said that there could be by 2030 there could be as much as 113 million barrels a day of production capacity and only 103 to 105 million barrels a day of demand. All of
Right.
that spells trouble for prices, oil prices. And of course, the Alberta government gets, I think last year they got $24 billion of oil revenue, oil and gas
Right.
revenue. And
Hmm.
the Canadian government, from the activity, the taxes collected on the activity generated by the oil and gas industry, collects somewhere between 3 and 6 billion. Those are not small numbers. Those are
Yeah.
very material numbers. It also explains why governments are so eager to expand oil and gas production because
Right.
they want the revenue. So
Yeah.
yeah, this is we're all watching OPEC, and here's the other kicker that this is really important. I saw this in the 2018 BP Energy Review, where Spencer Dale, their economist, laid it out. But apparently, it's quite common in the industry, and that is if oil demand is going to peak and then decline, when do low-cost producers like the Middle East producers say, okay, it's now in our best interest to not uh, worry about market share or not to keep market share down to keep prices up, but to flood the
Yeah.
market and take back market share, to force the
Right.
Americans out of the market, to force, the high cost producers out of the market.
Right. Yeah.
And then that changes everything because now all of a sudden, you're looking at prices maybe in the $30, $40 range, and that would be disastrous for Canada, particularly Alberta. So it's a very fluid, complex kind of, and I'm not an oil and gas expert, but the way Ed laid it out is he thinks that the Saudis are moving in that direction. He thinks that's where that Spencer Dale's argument is now going to come true. We'll see.
Right.
They're certainly this is what OPEC Plus is doing is taking back market share, but that could change depending on how things play out over the next 5 years. So we'll see, and what's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, interesting story to follow and definitely see how that might impact workers and maybe layoffs, all that kind of stuff. The industry could see huge changes. I I think we're gonna stop there. I want to take just a few minutes to talk to people about what they can do if they care about energy, Canada's energy future. You know, what are some of the small actions that they can take? Firstly, thanks for watching and obviously subscribe to our channel. That is a big part of what you can do. Share our content with your friends and your family. Get informed. You can share our posts on social media. If you're really looking to step it up a notch, Mark and I talked about this last week. It's write your elected leaders. Start asking these questions. We talked a little bit about Alberta's opposition today and also about Smith. Why don't we ask these tough questions to the people who are currently making these decisions? And uh, obviously, write Mark and I a message. If you have questions or things that you're really wanting to learn about, we are going to be doing more lives like we did last week, where we went through a bunch of comments from either from our videos or live comments. So if you show up live, any of your questions, I will read them out for Mark on like live, and we can get his immediate reaction. So other than that, thanks for watching. And Mark, I'm going to give you the last word.
Thanks, MC. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Um, we need to do more lives where we respond to comments and questions. We get a lot of emails now, and we get a lot of comments on the video threads. The problem is there's so much going on at the moment. I don't we've been covering energy for 15 years here at Energy Media, and I don't remember anything being, the global system. There's so many stories to cover. And
Yeah.
we've always meant to get to more viewer comments. And I think we maybe should do a live show occasionally where it's just comments. That might be
Yeah,
an idea people
a
like.
good idea. Well, we're going to do some member only webinars coming up. We're going to do one this week, and we're going to start doing those. So, if you are a member, that exclusive content is coming down the pipe for you. And other than that, I just want to thank everyone for your support and for watching the show this week.